marriage for homosexuals. And I know that Denmark is very advanced in this field. And there were two camps. It was extremely controversial. One could be of an opinion or in favor or against. It's not my purpose to bring this controversy now. And personally, I was in favor of this law. But both camps were fighting with their own vision of their moral. Those who were in favor, but also those who were against, as those who are against abortion, for example. They do that because they have their moral. So if we are moral against moral, ethic against ethic, we go to the clash of civilizations. That's why human rights should not be a matter of ethic, a Western ethic against other ethic. It should be a matter of discussion about principles on which everyone should agree. Therefore, they are not perfect, but it is law, it is not virtue. And the second word on which I wanted to draw your attention is, which has been mentioned previously, and it's at the very heart of the UN vision. It's universality. What means universality? In the Millennium Goals, they talk about universality. And in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in Paris in 1948, is the only text that revendicates in its title this name, this concept of universality. This concept is simply that there is, as it is stated in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a human family beyond the borders, beyond the nationalities, beyond the cultures and the religion. We all belong to this human family. This very simple concept, this very pure, very noble idea of human family, which was the backbone of UN for decades, is now under threat and sets back. Why? Because on some continents you have those who say, okay, we are in favor of human rights. We have adopted our own human rights charter, but it's not the same than yours, because in our culture, women should not have the same rights than men. Universality sets back. Or in Asia, some head of states have developed during the last decades this idea of Asian values. They say that in this part of the world, people would be less concerned by their rights, their civil rights, but more interested in economic development and economical rights, but not freedom of expression and not political rights. So, if I wrap up these two notions, I think that you have to have in mind two things very clear. First, human rights should be built, forged in arenas which are dedicated to be the good pot for that. The name is UN, New York, Geneva, but as well OSCE in Vienna, and Brussels, European Union as well. This is a good forum to debate, to create, to agree, to negotiate, and eventually to adopt those rights. And after, one has to enforce them. And it's not only speeches and rights on the paper, but it has to be on the paper to be in the reality after. For example, the Convention on Torture. I mentioned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but I should also mention the Convention on Torture. I should also mention the Convention against Enforced Disappearances. All of you have heard about the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And there are prisoners there who are jailed for having recruited child soldiers and having committed with them mass crimes. This is not speeches. This is not a kind of moral. This is absolutely real. There is a jurisdiction. There is a jail. There are judges, lawyers, and accused persons. And how come this jurisdiction exists? It exists because it has been promoted, defended, debated, adopted, and created in the framework of UN for decades. This is how human rights can be built and defended, and in particular human rights instruments and human rights tools to make them enforced. It's far from being perfect, but it is the only solution I know. I come back, and it will be my last word on universality. This concept, which appeared to be obvious for our predecessors, is now under threat. And the promoters, those who are against universality, invoke culturalism, regionalism. They say, okay, we should adopt and change the human rights depending on the latitudes, depending on the culture, of the religion, of the tradition. We have to answer to this attack. We have to respond. And this would be the challenge of your generation. How to do it? One could argue on a philosophical field, but I'm not a philosopher. One could argue on a legal field, saying that universality, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it has been adopted by a majority of nations, so the debate is over, there is no question. But it will not work, because when it was adopted, it was 65 years ago, and at this time we had 40 nations, now we had 192. It's a different world. So you should find other arguments. And I will give you mine. When I traveled in the world, when I witnessed the suffering of people, I remember, I mentioned enforced disappearances. I don't know if you know what are enforced disappearances. This is a part of the grammar of all dictators in the world. They take activists who are against them and they make them disappear, and the family cannot go to court, cannot go to the police station, because they say, you say that your father has been killed, but you have no evidence, nobody. You say that he has been kidnapped, but we have no evidence, nothing, so we cannot even launch an inquiry. And this is how in Argentina they make disappear generation of opponents and activists. But unfortunately, this happened all over the world. I met a lot of parents of these victims. And when I think to these mothers I met in Chechnya, in Lebanon, in Algeria, in Congo, in Colombia, in Burma, when I think to them now, I see them talking about their beloved child or father in the same terms, with the same words. Sometimes they had a photo and they touched the face of their child as if it was a caress. And I saw this very special way of touching a photograph of a disappeared person everywhere in the world. It's exactly, I've seen dozens of those mothers, and I can tell you that now it's exactly in my memory if I saw only one. It's not it's not human rights as a concept, abstract concept, which are universal. It is mankind which is universal. Man suffering which is universal. And I don't know two different ways of suffering from torture depending of the continent, the culture, of the religion. And if someone tells you universality is a Western concept imposed in a kind of neo-colonial crusade, ask him, can you repeat it? Can you repeat that the right against convention of torture is a Western concept? Can you tell it with a knife under the nail? And you'll see if it's a Western concept. I don't think it is. It is so the concept of human family, which is at the very heart of the DNA of UN, has to be promoted, and this is the task of your generation. Thank you.